So today the RTX 4090 launched, and it's fast. So fast, it's an utter waste in 1440p. Seriously, we are now in a world where a 1440p display is quite literally wasted on an enthusiast GPU outside of very specific scenarios. It's not a matter of if you want to game in 240Hz, it's clear that some game engines just don't scale efficiently enough to benefit from the fastest GPUs anymore, as Gamers Nexus highlighted.
It's 2015 now on GPUs. We've never seen a card hold basically the engine cap like this.
So don't waste your time buying this if you have a 1440p screen unless you are literally a paid professional gamer that knows their game of choice will be able to gain more than 20 to 40% from this monster over the previous generation. But in 4K? Well, look at what happens to this graphics card's lead in Hitman once you remove the CPU bottleneck. And look at what's actually possible in games that aren't CPU bottlenecked as badly as others. Look, there's no way around this. The RTX 4090 may not be 3 to 4 times the performance of the 3090 in raster, but that's not what I told you it would hit. And that's not what anyone should have expected based on what was physically possible going from Samsung's 8nm node to TSMC's 4N node. As explained in this video I did earlier this year that broke down what's physically possible and has aged, well, shockingly well. I basically stated that going from 450 watts on 8nm to 450 watts on 4N, the number suggested that we should expect the 4090 to be about 59% faster than a 3090 Ti in raster. And honestly, well, look, it depends on the benchmark due to how prevalent CPU bottlenecking is with this graphics card, but it's arguably a tad better than that, which is just crazy to me. Seriously, the RTX 4090 has not wasted TSMC's node at all, and I am sincerely impressed by how thoroughly this card manages to push the limits of what's even conceivably possible on the node that it is using. But with success comes new kinds of issues that many people didn't have to worry about with previous gen flagships, at least not to the extent they do now. This card needs the fastest CPU if you are attempting to actually test or fully leverage its performance at super high frame rates, even at high resolutions, when comparing it to Ampere. And I'm a little disappointed, honestly, in what I saw of the test rigs on a few websites. It's okay to use Alder Lake or a 5800X3D, I would argue, but anything less than that for a test system is silly. You should have one of the latest CPUs, or at least close to that, if you're going to test a GPU that is capable of 100 teraflops after overclocking. And I really do wish more websites would have used Zen 4 and their 4090 testing today, but oh well, I guess we'll have to wait for that. Either way, right now, it's at least clear to me that when you remove the CPU bottlenecking games, this card, the 4090, is a solid around 80% better than the RTX 3090 in rasterization, and that's before we even talk about ray tracing. And I do want to be clear about this too. We should be comparing, in my opinion, the 4090 to the 3090. The 4090 and the 3090 are cut down cards that are using almost the best memory on the market that is available at the time of release. You see, the 3090 Ti isn't cut down, it's pushed extra hard, and it's using memory that wasn't even available in 2020, and I expect that's what the updated version of the Titan or the 4090 Ti, whatever Nvidia calls it, will end up using. So yeah, I just covered that the RTX Titan Lovelace has been canceled because it was melting power supplies, and apparently sometimes itself, but better memory is coming that will give you more bandwidth at lower power usage, and I think Nvidia is going to wait for that and also spend some more time thinking about if they should ever give the full die to gamers, because it just might not be worth it. They also need some more time to properly tweak the power curve. But right now, the 4090, with the memory available on the market right now, this is the best they could manage without just completely ruining its efficiency. Although, honestly, I do wonder if they could have, or really just should have, made this graphics card more tame. If we go to Der Bauer's review of the RTX 4090, we can see that this thing keeps about 95% of its performance at 70% power consumption, even in synthetic tests, and that in real-world gaming, at 60% power, this thing often still keeps about 95% of its performance. The 4090 is pushed far outside of its efficiency sweet spot to the point that I actually think it's a little too fast for its own good when you consider that it's also clearly just drunkenly crashing into the same CPU overhead issues that Hardware Unboxed described last year. You see, when I look at this CPU bottlenecking and then I look at how far this thing is pushed outside of its efficiency sweet spot, there is no way around it. Nvidia missed a major opportunity to offer the market a card that it really wanted and they just can't buy. Look at the RTX 4080 16GB. That thing, the Founders Edition, also is going to be using this gigantic triple slot cooler that makes it prohibitive to put into probably most cases. And it's just unnecessary. That card didn't need to be that big. And the 4090, well, I'm not saying they couldn't have launched some super high power card that makes it hard for AMD to beat them out of the gate. They could have pushed it a little harder, in my opinion. Maybe made it 500 watts and, given it the 23 gigabit per second memory, they're only giving to the 4080 16 gigabyte for some reason. And maybe even enabled another 512 or 1024 CUDA cores. I think Nvidia could have slightly enabled more SMs on the 4090, given it the fastest memory, pushed performance by 10%, and probably only upped power another 10% at most, and made it the same sized, crazy huge 4090 card over here, and then just taken what is now the 4090 with its 16,000 or so CUDA cores and the 21 gigabit per second memory, and just limited the power to 350 or maybe even 300 watts, put it in a 2-slot design, and well, you have to understand, guys, this extra power the 4090 uses has real costs, real dollar costs for what it takes to make those insane coolers that are the size of a PS5 and for what it takes to make the boards capable of supporting a chip using that much power. I think they could have shaved at least $200 off the BOM cost if they would have made this a 300-watt card, disabled it a lightly more, and just sold it as, I don't know, the 4080 Ti, and then made some other Titan or 4090 that uses the fastest memory that's out right now. And the fact that they haven't done this is very odd. But I guess for now, we're just going to have to be happy that Nvidia decided to not launch the 4090 with a 600-watt BIOS, and that they're not going to launch the 4080 16GB with what was probably originally intended to be a 375 to 420-watt BIOS. I don't know any other reason why Nvidia would use that crazy overbuilt cooler for the 4080 16GB as well, unless, think about it, it was probably going to use around 400 watts. It's clear to me that at a certain point, Nvidia realized that their CPU driver overhead problem meant that they just shouldn't push these cards as hard as they can, and it was too late to redesign the coolers and the product stack to make them have a cheaper BOM cost, a more compact design, and more efficient at stock settings. And I think this mistake is something that AMD is going to exploit with RDNA 3. And I want to talk about what I'm hearing about RDNA 3 today, what I think AMD's advantages will be when they launch next month with their new graphics architecture, and some other things I've noticed about the 4090 in today's reviews as well. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Looking to build a website? Consider choosing the one that's so easy to use, my dog can use it. This piece of content is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace allows you to pick from a series of templates that are each structured to cultivate a different type of website that you yourself can then tailor to your needs. Whether you're building an interactive resume to get hired this fall, or building a website for an existing business, Squarespace offers powerful features like members areas, allowing you to segment content that's sold to followers, online stores with options for both physical and digital products, and SEO tools to track your business and make informed decisions on how you can best grow it. Head to squarespace.com/Moore's Law is Dead to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using code Moore's Law is Dead. Clicking on this link and using this code greatly helps the channel, and it helps you launch your next venture. Support Moore's Law is Dead and your online presence with Squarespace today. All right. So, any discussion about what I expect about RDNA 3 has to start actually with what I leaked about both Lovelace and RDNA 3 a year ago. Now, to some of the people in the comments, I want to cover this. The reason I'm bringing up my past leaks is not to brag about being right. It's to point out that those sources who have remained reliable on leak after leak for me for over a year now have remained reliable to what we've seen today from the 4090. And they also talked about RDNA 3. I'm bringing up these past leaks because it's important to today's conversation. And today what we can say is these people that said that Lovelace would be about 60 to 80% better than Ampere, but maybe close to double, although probably just below double the raster performance if they pushed it to insane power consumption levels. These people also expected RDNA 3 to hit a similar level of performance in raster if AMD wanted to, depending on the power usage. So that's number one here. The first thing I have to remind you all of. These same people that told me what Lovelace's performance was a year ago also tell me that RDNA 3's raster performance is going to be similar. And, well, yeah. Of course, today I reached out to as many of my contacts as I could to just get a reading for the temperature in the room over at Radeon. Are they still confident? Do they still stand by their projections for how they will be able to compete with Lovelace? And, well, I'm not going to put any quotes on screen, but I'll just tell you what the general feeling is. The general feeling I get today from AMD engineers, and rest assured, there will be videos coming out where I will have quotes in the coming weeks, but right now I just want to give you an idea, is that they still expect RDNA 3 to have rasterization performance that is competitive with the 4090, although they might not push power as hard as they initially planned to because, well, they just don't see the point. They look at the power curve on TSMC's 5nm family of nodes, and unlike Nvidia, who pushed it to, I would argue, stupid levels, they feel there's no point in launching the crazy flagship yet until faster memory is available and until they know literally what performance level they need to hit to firmly beat the 4090. And when it comes to ray tracing performance, it's pretty consistent now that nobody expects the top RDNA 3 card, at least launched this year, to beat the 4090 in ray tracing. And I mean, I don't know, guys, just look at these results. The ray tracing uplift Nvidia has brought with Lovelace is absolutely crazy. And like, if I look at this benchmark here, and I know this is technically a synthetic test, but this isn't some ridiculous Nvidia marble demo or some car racing thing. I think that, well, this is imperfect and this isn't a real game. This is an indication of the mountain AMD would probably have to climb if they wanted to match the 4090 in ray tracing. And, well, I certainly think RDNA 3 will at least double ray tracing performance, and who knows, maybe even triple it. I don't think they're going to 4x it. And I've been talking about this in recent podcasts and videos. I'm told, at least recently, that RDNA 4 is the RDNA architecture that really doubles down on using a significant amount of the die space for ray tracing performance increases. And that at least right now, even though RDNA 3 is going to bring a huge performance increase in ray tracing per raster compared to RDNA 2, it will. RDNA 4 is the architecture that AMD is betting will be the first time where people go, you know what? I still care a lot about raster, but I really do care about ray tracing now. AMD still doesn't feel like that's where people are at with RDNA 3, or at least that's what they say. They may just also not be ready to try to directly beat Nvidia in ray tracing, and that's their excuse. But, well, it's unlikely that RDNA 3 will even come close to matching Lovelace's ray tracing performance. I do think rasterization is another story, especially, well, if you bring up 1440p. You see, this software bottleneck that Nvidia is dealing with their graphics architectures is something that AMD is going to exploit heavily, if I had to guess. If AMD wants to go full Ryan Shrout with how they cherry-pick benchmarks, I think they're going to be able to this time around. AMD has been very outspoken this year about how they want to have the most stable drivers and the most optimized drivers at fully utilizing whatever CPU you have, and that's because they know they need to do that if they're going to launch a graphics card that's this insanely powerful this year. And because of this, I think whether or not AMD wins rasterization performance in 4K, that they are going to at least be able to point to their 1440p performance. And because of this, probably a lot of the 4K games that are bottlenecked by the CPU on the 4090 already and go, no, look, you see, we actually get a similar amount of rasterization performance, and we do so without using 450 watts and without needing to charge you an arm and a leg. Remember, too, AMD can launch a 7950 XT next year that pushes past 400 watts if they want to, even if they don't launch one this year. But this year, they seem to understand that if you can just get your drivers to be as efficient as possible at utilizing a CPU, and then just hit TSMC's efficiency curve right where it needs to be, you can shave off hundreds of dollars in cost. And not just because of the cooling and the board, but also because AMD is just using much less expensive silicon. Half the silicon in Navi 31 is not the 5 nanometer class of node from TSMC. Yeah, I think this is going to be a fascinating head-to-head competition to watch in about a month, where Nvidia can point to some things that they clearly win at, AMD can point to some other things they clearly win at, and depending on which games you play at which resolution, similar to last generation actually, it's going to seem like one of them is just far better. But I do think that price performance, guys, I think that's going to be the tiebreaker, even in laptop. You see, it is abundantly clear. The 4090 makes it clear that Lovelace is not an inefficient architecture. And I expect Lovelace to have some pretty crazy cool design wins in laptop where they're bringing, well, I mean, easily probably a 70% performance increase at same TDPs to the laptop market next year. But here's the thing. I think AMD's efficiency is going to be better or at least close. And I think AMD is going to charge far less money for the Ryzen Advantage laptops that have a Phoenix CPU and an RDNA 3 GPU, even some RDNA 3 GPUs that only use 6 nanometer. So, yeah, the good news right now is that Lovelace has delivered on performance, and that I believe RDNA 3 is still going to deliver as well. But if you want the best ray tracing or whatever in some, or 4K or 8K, I guess, gaming, it seems like Lovelace might have that down. But that AMD is going to have its own performance niches that beat Nvidia as well, but they're also going to have a cost advantage. And you know, I can't help but wonder if Nvidia realized this. If the reason Nvidia is pushing the 4090 so far out of its efficiency curve with such an oversized cooler is because they realized, well, they just have this massive, expensive TSMC 4 nanometer monolithic die, and that it's always going to cost significantly more to make any card that uses it than what AMD's bringing to the market. And so even if it seems stupid, they have to. They just have to make sure they win performance because they're gonna have to charge more money because AMD is going to undercut them. And I honestly do think that's what explains what Nvidia is doing here. Do I think it was the right decision? No. I think Nvidia can just charge more money because they have insane GPU mindshare, and that they really should have just had one model that was called the 4090, maybe pushed a little bit harder than the current 4090 with faster memory, and then that sold for whatever, and they should have had a 4080 Ti that was slightly more cut down at 300 watts out of the gate to make them look good, because they could have done this. And there's a lot of people I know that just aren't going to get a 4080 16 gigabyte or 4090 because none of them will fit in their case. But yeah, that's what I think is going on. I think Nvidia did this because they know they have to look the strongest no matter what, because there's no way they can compete in price with RDNA 3, and we're just going to have to see how much AMD undercuts them. And I certainly hope they go for it and can afford to push for market share here so that we can get, well, get the competition this market's been waiting for that it never really got last gen due to shortages. And speaking of shortages, I don't really expect many shortages with the RTX 4090 as I covered in my recent video. I think you're going to be able to get one, especially at Micro Center if you're willing to try and fit one of those AIB cards in your case. I think they're going to have truckloads of them, literally truckloads arriving with tons of 4090s tomorrow. And if you want the Founders Edition, which I will say, I do expect that version to sell out because it is, though huge, the most reasonably sized version of the 4090. You're going to have to go to Best Buy's website. And actually, this is interesting. I asked around today why NVIDIA partners with Best Buy to sell their Founders Edition graphics cards, and I got a few answers that were pretty similar. Basically, what I'm told is apparently Best Buy is just willing to accept lower margins than most retailers. And of course, NVIDIA demands really low margins on those Founders cards that are priced very aggressively. Additionally, Nvidia doesn't want to handle the sales of their cards from their website if they can avoid it, because it's just basically a self-imposed DDoS attack that is just not worth bothering with, according to them. That it's just much easier to let another person who does tons of online sales every day handle that headache and then handle those lower margins, and then Nvidia can just handle making the cooler and giving it to Best Buy. So I don't know. I thought that was another interesting tidbit as well. I don't have really anything else to say about DLSS 3. I'm not satisfied with the testing I've seen so far, and I know that Hardware Unboxed and others will do very good testing this week, so I'm just going to kind of save that for a broken silicon or something, or another video where I finally give my thoughts on DLSS 3. Heck, I might just wait until I can test it myself, because I really do want to test DLSS 3 myself, as I probably will be getting an RTX 4090, not for play. Don't do as I do. Do as I say. You have to understand, most things I buy are not for gaming anymore. I'm getting this so I can sped out those videos as fast as possible for you guys, and so I can directly test if Nvidia's claims are bullshit. So yeah, I will be trying to get a 4090 to test DLSS 3 myself, and of course improve how fast I can get videos done. Do not take that to mean that I think everyone should buy a 4090. I'm one person. Me getting one card does not affect the overall sales of Nvidia, guys. I would expect most people should wait for RDNA 3, if not just wait for prices in general to keep going down into Q1 and for faster CPUs to actually be able to leverage these cards. But yep, I'm starting to ramble. That's going to just about do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe to Moore's Law is Dead. Half of you are not subscribed, according to the statistics I'm seeing on YouTube. And make sure you tell your friends about us, and then support us on Patreon if you have the extra money. We'll have a new die shrink coming out within a day that is going to be me and Dan having a conversation about the 4090 reviews with input from the fans. So remember, if you support us on Patreon right now and submit a reader mail to that reader mail request, you'll be able to be featured potentially on that episode. But all of that's there for you if you have the extra money. At the end of the day, though, no matter what, thank you for watching.